Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian, and this is Bird Bombs, helpful bursts of ID info. This is Prairie Hawks, episode 22. And tonight I'm joined by Laura Stedman, fellow DFO field trip leader, and she'll be ready to help with any questions or comments you might have at the end. So do use our Q&A and our chat for that. So Prairie Hawks. Tonight we're talking about Colorado Buteos. And these are indeed Buteos. I mean, look at these birds. These are birds that everybody loves to see no matter what. And here in Colorado, we have a great opportunity to enjoy them all relatively easily if we make the right efforts. So these are some of the ones we're going to focus on tonight. And we're not talking just about the fall and winter. We're going to look at kind of the whole year for these Colorado Buteos. But this is a great time to get out and enjoy them because we can see more than any other time the rough-legged hawk and the Ferruginous hawk. And also good numbers of red-tailed hawks and some unusual or wintertime only subspecies of that. So this is a great time to get out and enjoy them. And I wonder if anybody watching tonight has seen all four of the species illustrated on this slide, all on the same day in Colorado. It's not an easy thing to do, and we'll find out why. Broad-winged hawk, Swainson's hawk, rough-legged hawk, and Ferruginous hawk. Have you seen them all on the same day? I don't think I have. All right, so there are 7 species of Buteos in Colorado, and we're talking about large birds of open country. Some of them, like the broad-winged hawk, are really forest-associated hawks, but we still see them in open country here. These guys have long wings and short, broad tails. So we can contrast that, say, with the accipiters, with their short wings and long tails for maneuvering through trees. These are birds that are foraging in more open settings. And in Colorado, all of the Buteo species are migratory, but we do have 2 species, the red tail and the Ferruginous hawk, that are here all year round, but their numbers are augmented during the wintertime and some move on to other places, but all the species are migratory, but those 2 are here all year round. And as we're thinking about the Buteos, we realize that mostly we're looking at species where the sexes appear pretty similar or they're a little bit different, but not strong differences like we might see in some songbirds. And these birds will retain, when the juveniles leave the nest, they will retain that appearance for almost a whole year as they begin that first molt. So we see birds in that juvenile plumage for a long time here in Colorado, and those birds will retain that look for up to 2 into 3 years until they attain a full adult appearance. So we have a lot of young birds to look at as well. So here's our 7 Colorado Buteos over here on the right, and we've got them kind of color-coded. So I have 2 in the light purple, and these are species that are rare in Colorado. The red-shouldered hawk and the zone-tailed hawk just occur rarely, and we're really not going to deal further with those tonight. Our focal species are going to be these 5. Now, one of them is really the background focal species for everything, and that's the red-tailed hawk. And I dealt with that one in a special way in a prior Bird Bombs. I hope you'll check it out or review it. It's probably a red tail. All right, so you can check that out on our Bird Bombs archive, and that will lay the foundation for considering what the red-tailed hawk is all about. And we'll take a little look at that tonight, but mostly we're going to be considering these other 4 species, the broad-winged hawk, Swainson's hawk, rough-legged hawk, and Ferruginous hawk. Now, as you know, the bird names that are named after people are going to be changing. That's what we've learned. And so we can play that game and come up with our own fun ideas for what to name these birds when the names get changed. Now, we may not have any say in it, but I am proposing for the Swainson's hawk that it be Pampas to Prairie hawk. First off, it's a great description of them geographically, but also when you have PP-ha, it's fun, that 4-letter code when you can say PP-ha, PP-ha. You know, you're out there, hey, it's a PP-ha. Yeah, so we'll see what happens with that. But I have some pro tips to consider for these Buteos that we're looking at tonight. One thing that's really important is to learn the seasonality. Some of these species only occur here at certain times of the year. So you're right away working out what you're going to expect when. And where would that be? So they like certain kinds of habitat. Are you in a riparian region with big trees? Or are you out in the wide open? Do you happen to have a prairie dog town right in the area. What region of the state are you in? Out on the prairie is different from what happens up in the mountains as far as our Buteo hawks. And then what behavior are you seeing? Some of these birds have distinctive perching habits, whether they'll perch on a wire, for example, like the Swainson's hawk and broad-winged hawk do, but you won't see the Ferruginous hawk perching on a wire, for example, or how they hunt. So those are good things to pay attention to. You want to be aware of lighting because it's going to affect what you see. As always, it's a consideration. But when you can put yourself in a better lighting circumstance, you want to work to that, but consider what you have. And we're here in Colorado, we have snowy winters. And when there's snow on the ground, anything that's white colored or pale underneath appears very bright. So hawks look very bright when they're flying over the snow or even perched out in a snowy field. And it can even overwhelm the dark marks you might see that might not be really heavy. So you want to consider that brightness in the snow. And really important is to take advantage of good optics. So a lot of times these birds are far away, out across fields or what have you, and you can see okay with the binoculars, but if you can have a scope along or be with somebody that has one, take advantage of that and see what you can learn by having a much better view of a perched bird or even a flying bird through the scope. So that's one of the great things about going on a field trip with other birds. If you don't have a scope yet, or you don't have one, whatever it is, go on a field trip. Almost certainly the leader and often other birds along are going to have a scope. So a great way to take advantage of that. But when you're out there looking, you want to watch out for the drive-by IDs. There's a lot of windshield boo-boos that occur out there on the highways and byways here in Colorado. So be wary of the bird you just barely catch out of your eye, or the one that the people behind you saw well, but you didn't, or what have you. Or just the fact that our windshields and windows and car parts obscure what we can see and make it tough. So watch out for those windshield boo-boos. So out on the prairie, it's always beautiful, no matter what season it is. It's great to be out there. Sometimes it's a little harsh, but it's beautiful country. And we have all these fantastic hawks to enjoy. Beautiful to encounter them, but things get in the way. There's distance issues, there's lighting, sometimes there's vegetation in the way. The bird flies off and goes away. It always seems to go away, and things just tend to go, from bad to worse when you're out there. And sometimes it just feels hopeless. And then you remember that there's different ages of these hawks and that they look a little different, whether they're a young bird or an adult bird. And that's difficult. And all these birds are polymorphic. So we have to deal with birds that are light colored, birds that are dark colored, sometimes birds that are in between. It just can become a lot, but we need to take courage because in the end, it's probably a red tail, and that's going to hold true. The red-tailed hawk is the one that we see in more places and in greater numbers than any of the other hawk species. It is our reference species, and that means we need to know it really well and pay attention to the red-tailed hawks when we can see them, so we can keep really tuned in on what they're all about, because they're going to be a key for recognizing when we have different things, because they do represent the most frequent and the most abundant of our Buteo hawks. Now we can review the basic 5 key red-tail marks. I know you're all familiar with this. We, of course, have the orange tail on adults and the dark patagials, those feathers on the leading edge of the wing between the shoulder and the bend of the wing are the patagials. And on red-tailed hawks, they're contrasting dark. And then they have a belly band. And they're wearing a pale backpack V. That's what we call the pale patterning on the scapulars. Forms like a V pattern. So they have some particular pattern back there. And red-tailed hawks typically have a dark hangman's hood, especially our western red-tail, like this bird on the lower right with its creamy body coloration, has a nice dark brown over much of the throat area as well. So it really has that hangman's look. So that's our basic red-tail. And I know you're familiar with that, but this is going to be in the background of what we're going to be talking about as we proceed this evening. So let's get right into our other 4 focal species. And the first thing we want to sort out is a little bit of understanding about where they occur and when and what's going on with all of that, or status and distribution. So the broad-winged hawk map is shown over on the left side of the screen here. And what I notice is that in this map from Birds of the World, that the broadwing is a North American breeder, but it's essentially nearly completely migratory down into Central and South America. And it looks like it doesn't even occur in Colorado, but in fact, that map is a little generalized, and broadwings do occur during migration in Colorado. So they're mainly along the Front Range edge. That's where the most are found, but then all across the eastern prairie as well. You can find the broadwing hawk during its migration times. Put the little star there to indicate where Colorado is there to kind of help you see. And so that yellow area to the right of the star is that portion of the state where we have the broadwing hawk. Now, the Swainson's hawk is also a northern hemisphere to southern hemisphere migrant, but it goes a lot farther than the broadwing hawk. It goes all the way down into Argentina where that pampas habitat is. So the pampas to prairie hawk occurs commonly east of the mountains in Colorado in our prairie setting, and up in the mountains in the mountain parks where there is similar prairie kinds of habitats, and more locally across western Colorado. The rough-legged hawk is our far northern breeder. It's the only one that's breeding up in the Arctic regions, and you can see on the map here that it is indeed circumpolar. It's all the way across both the western and eastern hemispheres. And the rough-legged hawk for us is one that we see in the wintertime, fall and winter, out in the prairie especially, and up in the mountains where there's open areas, mountain parks, and then locally out in western Colorado. So you're seeing similar themes there, I hope, in the distributions. Now, the Ferruginous hawk, the last of our four, doesn't get as far north as the rough-legged hawk, and it doesn't get as far south as some of the other hawks, and it's in Colorado year-round, unlike the other species we're considering here on this page. And the Ferruginous is also mostly east of the mountains, locally in the mountain parks, and locally across western Colorado. You can find the Ferruginous hawk. So going along with where they are comes when they are. And so what we have here is a chart showing the Front Range counties and the Denver metro area counties. That's where a lot of us are. So let's take that under consideration first. And this is showing frequency. So how often these birds are reported on eBird checklists. And you can see that far and away the most frequent and also the most abundant, it turns out the parallels are great between frequency and abundance, is the red-tailed hawk. And so you can see that's far and away the most frequent. And the Swainson's hawk gets a little bit numerous, but the others are far less common. And indeed, at this time of year, just using one little measure as a sample, the Denver CBC circle, which happens to be the one I live in here in the southwestern part of the Denver metro area, and numerically, red-tailed hawk accounts for 98% of the identified Buteos on that count in recent years. And the other two species that are here at this time of year, rough-legged and Ferruginous, just 1% each. So those are individuals that birders also are looking very hard to find, those rare ones within the count circle. So it's probably a little bit skewed there, but you can see how oriented it is towards the rough-legged hawk. But let's take away the rough leg out of the mix a little bit here, and we'll consider one really cool thing. The Swainson's hawk is our summertime hawk, spring and summer, into the fall a little bit. And the rough-legged hawk is our non-breeding season hawk. And these guys have a seasonal conversion. And so it's really not that easy to see both these species on the same day in Colorado. Notice the little sweet spots in those graphs where they overlap here in very late March and early April, and again in the beginning part of October, but you got to get lucky to encounter both species in the same day. So that's a personal challenge I'd like to toss out there for you. We can see how different those patterns are. And then also with the red-tailed and Swainsons out of the mix, we can appreciate the patterns better for these other less common Buteos. We can see the Ferruginous and the rough-legged have very similar patterns for frequency here in Colorado. The rough-legged goes away entirely during the breeding season. The Ferruginous is present in the metro area along the Front Range in a reduced or pretty low frequency, but they are around. And the broadwing, just with those two seasonal peaks of spring migration and fall migration. So now let's, on the right side, let's consider our Colorado prairie counties and compare that just briefly to the Front Range metro area counties. And we can see that the frequency of the rough-legged hawk and the Ferruginous hawk is 3 to 4 times greater out there on the prairie. So if you really want to encounter those birds, that's the place to go, or along the eastern margins of the developed parts of the Front Range region are also pretty good. But you want to get out eastward into those wide open habitats. And we can see that also in the prairie, the redtail and the Swainsons have a similar frequency during their breeding seasons. So, maybe it's not just a redtail after all when you're out there. This is a little chart. If you like these graphs, I put this in here so you can read it in the video afterwards. I'm not going to look at it now, but this will explain how you can make these kind of graphs in eBird. It's really simple to do. All right, so during the nesting season, we have 3 Buteos here in Colorado. During the heart of the nesting season, the broad-winged and the rough-legged aren't around at all, but we can look at the breeding distribution for our 3 nesting Buteos. Swainson's is a prairie hawk up in the mountain parks a bit, sparsely out over the west. The red-tailed hawk, very widely distributed as we expect as our reference species. The Ferruginous hawk, really a prairie breeding distribution and not nearly so frequent or densely occurring as the Swainsons, and pretty sparse out there in the western part of Colorado and up in the Colorado mountains. So, the really cool thing to remember about these hawks and their nests is that hawk nests are homes for owls. These guys, especially out on the prairie where other nest providers are sparse, the Buteo hawks are the ones that are making the homes for most of our great horned owls. So that's a pretty special interaction. It's especially cool when you think that generally the great horned owl and these Buteo hawks are sworn enemies, but the hawks really kind of depend on the owl. The owl kind of depends on the hawk. So that's pretty cool. So what I want to know before we go any farther is, where's that on a hawk? So we got to sort out the parts of the hawk a little bit, the things we're going to talk about to help us make sense of what we call things and where things are on the bird. So we have 3 beautiful Ferruginous hawk images here. And we can take first a look at the flight feathers. So we have flight feathers on the wing, our remiges, and flight feathers of the tail, our tail feathers, rectrices. And let's focus a bit on the wing flight feathers. We have 2 groups we want to be aware of for our Buteos. The primaries are the outermost 10 feathers. And we can notice that some of them look a little different from the ones that are a little farther in. These outer ones go by the nickname of fingers, and they have that different appearance of sticking out like fingers because the feathers are actually shaped differently. If you look down on the lower right image, where I'm wiggling my cursor, you can see that the feather actually cuts inward. It's called emargination. There's 2 different feather-shaped things going on that create this pattern of space between the feathers that lets us appreciate those fingers. So we have the primaries with those fingers. There's 10 primaries, and then a number of secondaries are the inner row of feathers that we see along the wing. There are the tertials also in the flight feathers, but we don't really deal with those too much in considering our Buteo ID. So also on the underside of the wing, we see the underwing coverts, both primary coverts and secondary coverts that have different kind of markings or patterning. So we want to know where those are. Primary coverts are covering over the bases of the primaries, right? Secondary coverts covering over the bases of secondaries. And then the patagials, an area that's important for red-tailed hawk being a dark patch. We'll see on our other species tonight that it's not a dark patch there in the patagials. And when we're looking at hawks, sometimes we can't see the tail very well. It may be covered over by the folded wingtips that may hide the tail until the bird makes it evident for us. So you do want to consider that when you're looking at the bird. And those are the primary tips that are sticking out there long and over the tail. On some of these birds, we're interested in what's going on the legs. 2 of our species have feathered tarsi. Both these, the Ferruginous and rough-legged hawk, both have feathers actually on their lower legs, whereas, say, a red-tail is bare. Notice the red-tail's legs to the left here, where he's showing his tail. You can see his legs have no feathering, but there's feathering on the rough leg. The Ferruginous shares that. Both these hawks also have, and other Buteos, have feathers that hang down over the legs, called leggings or leg feathers. So they're different from the feathered tarsus. Okay. but they may provide an important ID clue for us. And looking at the heads of hawks, we're concerned about the cere, which is the colored area over the up above the top of the base of the bill, and the gape is the colored line that comes back below, or it's actually the area where the two open parts of the mouth meet, and on some of the hawks it extends farther back, on others less so, and sometimes it's boldly colored. So as we're appreciating this ferruginous hawks, notice the principal colors that make it up. So this can get us pretty much all the way to the ID. This rust, white, and black combo is unique. And notice the head on this bird. It's very big, and it has a big bill and bright cere and gape line coloration. So some of these IDs are not so challenging if you can cue in on to the particular points. And so let's take that a step further as we consider some of the parts of the birds as they appear different on these different individuals. So now I have all 5 of our reference species arrayed out here across the slide, going from the broad-winged on the left, Swainson's, then rough-legged in the middle, then Ferruginous to its right, and then off on the right for reference are red-tailed hawks. So we have adults here, sometimes adult males, and we can look at their patterns and colorations. And one thing we can notice right away is that these birds actually all look different. But let's take a look at some of the details as we go through and realize that the wing patterns and the tail patterns are completely different for these species. So if we can look at the wing pattern and the tail pattern, we should be able to get to the ID, right? And the wing shape and the proportions of the birds give them a different appearance. So let's consider the broad-winged hawk and some prominent things. We have views both below the bird and above the bird. And the things that stand out in the broadwing are this nifty dark border that's following along the trailing edge of the wing, and these bold, dark, black and white tail bands, highly contrasting, very bold bands. You can also look at the shape of this hawk and appreciate its kind of small, compact body and relatively short wings, kind of compact shape relative to these others. So broad-winged hawk. And then the Swainson's hawk is different in that you'll notice the other hawks on this page all have pale flight feathers. So our primaries and secondaries out here on the Ferruginous hawk, on the rough-legged hawk, on the broad-winged hawk, and on the red-tailed hawk are all pale. But on the Swainson's hawk, they contrast. They're dark. And so you have this two-tone pattern, a reverse pattern, because the flight feathers, the remiges, in this case, are dark. And so instead of being light, so you have this wonderful two-tone pattern, really unique for Swainson's hawk, most pronounced in the adult male and adult female, as we can see on this individual here. Looking above on the Swainson's hawk, we can appreciate some things about the tail, both above and below. So the tail on the Swainson's doesn't have the bold black and white pattern of the broad-winged hawk. Instead, it has narrow bands with a dark band near the tip. If you look carefully, that dark band is not at the tip, but it's just inside a little bit. So we call that the subterminal band. You can see above here on the rough-legged hawk image that band a little more easily. So we can beware of the subterminal band means it's not the lastmost part of the tail. Sometimes it could appear that way. The other thing we notice on the Swainson's is how nice and even colored it is above, except for this pale area, like on the upper tail coverts, on this pale rumpular region is a distinctive thing on the Swainson's hawk. And it fools people and takes them to a harrier sometimes even on birds that look a little more contrasty than this one does. So moving to the middle now with the rough-legged hawk, we can see that it has these big dark carpal patches in the wing. So the carpal joint is out here, we say, and the carpal patch is what we call this big dark patch. It's the only one of our hawks that has these big dark carpal patches. And the rough-legged hawk has a nice dark subterminal band on the adult. And we can see that even well on the top side of the hawk. And look how white-headed the rough-legged hawk looks. Compare that white-headed rough-leg to a Swainson's. Now, you're probably not going to see these guys in the same season, but you can compare there and see that the rough-leg is really a white-headed looking hawk. And we have these 3 points of light we'll refer to out in the wings and the base of the tail, upper tail covert rumpular region. There are 3 points of light. So we can take that 3 points of light right over to the Ferruginous hawk, and it has the same 3 points of light. A lot of people don't always appreciate that. But one of the things that's different in the Ferruginous, now first it has a little more white here and a slightly different pattern out on the wing, but it also on the adult has this nice red. So the Ferruginous hawk has that unique pattern, remember, of red, white, and black among the Buteos that we're considering here in those parts of the bird. And when we look at the bird in general, it's a very white hawk, a very pale white aspect. You see a dark comma out on the wings and these dark legs contrasting these dark leggings for an adult and a pale tail without any strong markings there. Notice how sparse the markings are underneath on the Ferruginous hawk. Okay, so we can now, let's take that a little farther and we'll consider some young birds. So we're looking at the same species assemblage here. We still have our red tail for some reference. And as we consider young and old together, we can look at the things that are different. So the adult broad-winged hawk has barring underneath while the juvenile is streaked. Okay, so different patterns there. See the barring going across and the streaking going top to bottom, if you will. All right, and they have a different tail pattern. So no more bold black and white, but now we have several less distinct dark bars and a broader subterminal band, not too different from this rough Swainson's hawk adult. Sorry, I see a typo here. This is a Swainson's hawk adult female. I got it right on the bottom part. But we can see again a little difference in the tail. There's no subterminal band there. We can see the Swainson's is generally more streaked and more marked below and doesn't have as much of a nice two-tone contrast. Call up my images there. And in the rough leg, we can see that really the juvenile looks a lot like the adult female, but it's got a darker belly blotch and a diffuse subterminal band. So where the adult rough leg has a sharp band, the juvenile has a diffuse band. And then with the Ferruginous hawk, really the juvenile is a paler bird with grayer primaries, and it's less marked underneath, and it doesn't have the red leggings of the adult. So when we're looking at young birds, we can remember that the basic ID points really hold for both adults and juveniles, sort of. There's a few things that won't be the same, but you can rely on some of the basic points to carry over. So another challenge that we have with the hawks is that they come in different flavors. So all of these species have a light morph and a dark morph, and some of them, the red tail, for example, in the Swainsons, have an intermediate morph, sometimes with a lot of variations therein. And so we can appreciate there's some challenges here to look at. But the same basic ID points of light morph hawks will help us to distinguish the dark birds too. All right, so the things you want to look at on the dark hawks would be wing-oriented things, flight feather-oriented things. What's the pattern out on the wingtips? What's the pattern in color on the rest of the flight feathers? What is the tail pattern in color? And what about the bill size and gape? So those things that are going to carry over from the light morph individuals. Remember, a morph is not something that changes over time, but these birds come in different color types, and they have that color type for their life. So the things that the light birds can be identified by often are useful for the adult birds as well. So the thing is, if it seems overwhelming, cheer up, because when they look alike, look to the flight feathers, and it's going to be the place you want to focus on, that and the bill size and coloration. So let's take a quick little closer look at some of our focal species here. And here's our small little broad-winged hawk. And its wings are relatively short and broad, and it has this distinctive tail pattern that we're talking about, and that dark border on the trailing end of the wing. And so that black and white tail bands and the dark border on the trailing end of the wing are the key marks there for our little broad-winged hawk. And the barring on the underparts of the adults, remember, is different from the juveniles, sparser streaking. And you can appreciate that from some of these perch birds below where we have adults and juveniles. You can appreciate those patterns. So we know it looks a little bit like the young ones look a little bit maybe like a young red tail or a young Swainson's, but they're a lot smaller. The markings are sparser, and it doesn't have a belly band like the red tail does, really. So when you see a young broadwing perched, maybe in the fall or even in the spring, because the 1-year-old broadwings look a lot like the young juveniles. You can look for that smaller size and some of those differences in markings underneath. So the broadwings we see are most always the light morphed ones. The dark ones are a lot less common, and there are no intermediate ones. And behaviorally, these are migratory birds that we have spring and fall only. We can see them sometimes in small groups. And this is one that we can see in town on a regular basis. They're not going to be common, but you can find broadwings in and around the urban and developed regions as they pass through. All right, so our Swainson's hawk, remember our two-toned bird. It's got these slim proportions with long pointed wings. That's a little different from our other hawks, give it a unique look. It holds its wings up in a dihedral. That kind of contributes to that. And notice that it really doesn't look very much like a red tail when you get down to it. There's no orange tail. Instead, we have the number of dark bars, bands on the tail with the little bit broader subterminal band. It doesn't have a belly band per se. It doesn't have a backpack V. It doesn't have dark patagials. It has a bib, not the hangman's hood. So it's a little different. The Swainson's hawk does have on the lighter birds, it has this beautiful bib with a contrasting white throat. And the bill is kind of bright yellow, but it's a small size bill. So those things kind of come together to give it a kind of a unique combination. And we talked already about the two-tone flight pattern created by the pale coverts and dark flight feathers. Notice the pale base on the tail in the upper center birds. This one in the top center looks a lot like a harrier, doesn't it? But the tail's shorter, and there's some other differences about wing shape and some other things, and it would be different the way it looked in life. But that can throw you, so you want to be aware of that pale rumpular region on the Swainson's hawk. So in the Swainsons, we get quite a mix of the color types and a lot of variations in between, and variations in between what males and females look like, so it can get a little bit complicated. Behaviorally, these guys are only here during the nesting season and leading up to and right after that. And these are birds that we can see in town. They nest in the developed region. And we see family groups a lot in late summer. And these is one of the species, that perches on wires. So we'll see the illustration there in the middle. So as we're comparing it to a Ferruginous hawk, it just has the one point of light. And there's a lot of differences in the head coloration, the smaller bill, the slender proportions. We know it's not a young red tail because it has a scaly pattern. A lot of the young Swainsons have a particular scaly pattern, and it doesn't share the red tail's backpack V or clear belly band. And the young Swainson's hawk often are buffy underneath, as you can see on this bird in the bottom kind of right there. Kind of has a nice creamy tone, and we see our young red tails are quite whitish underneath. So some differences there. This is kind of neat. So I mentioned that the birds do not, they retain their juvenile appearance all the way through their first year, and they'll begin to molt finally in their first spring. And it takes a while. And even after that first molt, they're going to look still partly like a juvenile. But here's a comparison of a juvenile Swainson's hawk on the left, freshly plumaged in August. Notice the very clean patterning of pale edges on those feathers, giving it a scaly pattern, and the pronounced markings on the head. And then as the bird is now nearly 1 year old in May, all of that scaly pattern has worn away as the feathers have become worn, and there's some different white blotchy patternings developing back there on the bird. So you can kind of appreciate how the bird changes over the course of those number of months from August to May. So rough-legged hawk it's a gorgeous hawk to see, and I hope to get out on the prairie or somewhere nearby and see some really soon. These are birds that are very showy. They have beautiful pale heads and these wonderful 3 dark blotches on their body and beautiful patternings of white and dark on the tail. So rough-legged hawk, a gorgeous hawk. It's large and slender, and it's a graceful hawk. It likes to perch up on tops of the tippy tops of trees and little branches that it might have to tip over with its weight, balancing up there. Notice the small bill and white-headed look. And in flight, notice those big dark carpal patches. They're unique for the rough leg, often paired with that third big patch in the center in the center of the bird there on the belly. The adult roughleg has that nice, bold, dark subterminal band. Some other coloration going on there on the tail, but one big, bold band. And on the young roughleg, like we see on the right, the juveniles, that band is diffuse, but there still is that one band showing up there, and the other features as well. So in the roughleg, we see the light morph primarily, but there are the dark morphs out there, and some of them are quite blackish looking. They're beautiful hawks. No intermediate morphs for this bird. It's one that we don't really see in town. So if you're in the developed area along the Front Range, you really want to look hard before you decide you're looking at a roughleg hawk. When you find them, they're going to be in the larger open areas, especially on the eastern portion margin of the developed area, but don't be looking for the roughleg hawk in town. Because that's not where you're going to encounter them. It's a bird of wide open spaces. No one else has 3 dark blotches. And look at that white head appearance and the small head and bill proportions. So we know it's not a Ferruginous by no reddish above and those bold markings underneath, unlike the very white Ferruginous and the nice subterminal band. So here we go with our Ferruginous, and we can see, again, look at the rust and white and blackish coloration. This is our biggest Buteo with a big head and a big bill. It has a bold sear and a long yellow gape. You can see in the center headshot here, that yellow gape extending all the way back below the eye. So this is distinctive with the Ferruginous, putting that together with the big head and the big bill and the bold sear as well. They're very pale underneath. Very pale flight feathers and generally sparse markings underneath. Remember, the adults have the red leggings and the juveniles are just white. You can see off on the right-hand side, you can compare the adults and juveniles there. The Ferruginous is one that shows the 3 points of light, but with the rusty shoulders and upper wings. The pale tail is mostly unmarked. So in the Ferruginous, just like with the roughleg, is the light morph that's common. We can see the dark morph, not too uncommonly. Intermediate forms are rare. And so this is also another hawk that we don't really see in town very much. They will occur, but again, it's going to be those places where there's open settings or maybe a prairie dog town. This is a bird that likes prairie dog towns. So when you're around prairie dog towns, you want to be watching for a Ferruginous hawk because it's a great place to find them. So again, notice the very white below. That combination of rust and white is unique, and white-headed with a large bill and head, unlike the roughleg hawk with the small bill and head. Roughleg, like I was just saying, also different tail band, and actually quite a few differences there. And really, red tail doesn't really look a whole lot like a Ferruginous hawk if you're provided with a decent view. It doesn't have any of the 5 key red tail marks. Plus, it's got the 3 points of light. So we're going to toss in a bonus Buteo now. This is one that is a red-tailed hawk, but it's the Harlan subspecies of the red-tailed hawk, which we have here in Colorado, fairly numerous during the late fall and winter in particularly, not during the breeding season. And this is a northwestern bird that subspecies in the northwestern part of the red-tailed hawk's range up in Western Canada and into Alaska. And as you can see from a lot of the birds shown here, it is a dark appearing bird because the dark morph Harlan's hawks are the ones that are the common ones here, and the light morph birds are rather uncommon. So these are birds that are mostly east of the mountain out in the prairie region or right along the Front Range. And some of the things you can notice that they usually show are some mottling of white on the breast. And sometimes it's a lot of it, and sometimes it's a little bit of it, but there's some white mottling there, and it's not particularly patterned or neat or orderly, but kind of messy. And there's also some white around the eye. When the bird is flying, you'll see a nice dark border, kind of like the broad-winged hawk, but you'll notice that the tail is differently patterned, and the two really don't overlap seasonally anyway, and the shapes are different, et cetera, et cetera. So the Harlan's hawk is one that we can enjoy at this time of year on into the beginning of spring. And this is a bird that likes a combination of open country and large trees. So we see it along riparian corridors or other places where there's big trees out with open areas is where you can find the Harlan's hawk. So when you get out into wide open spaces of prairie, you really don't see the Harlan's hawk very much, but you can see it in town. And you'll often see them perching in trees, like I have in the illustrations on a couple of these, where they're right there in amongst the vegetation. So you see a distant bird in the tree with that white on the breast and maybe some white in the eye that you can discern with the scope, and it's right there in the midst of the trees. Really good clue you have a Harlan's hawk, Harlan's form of the red tail. Okay, so now we've been through a lot. We've looked at a lot of different combinations of things, light birds, dark birds, old birds, young birds. But so now we're ready to put it to practice, and let's let it fly. I'm going to invite Laura Stedman to come back on and join me here as we consider some other pictures, and we can see what we've learned.
Hey, all right. Thanks, David.
Laura.
Lots of good tips there. So let's look at this first one.
Yeah, so this bird's like is flying out across a field.
Yeah.
And it looks like we can kind of see where we're
Cow
looking.
patties or prairie dog
Cow
bulls.
patties,
I'm
yeah,
not
or
quite
both.
sure. Maybe
Or both.
probably both, yeah.
Yeah, definitely very short grass that looks like a prairie dog.
The first thing that really jumps out to me about this one is all of the white on that bird. We've got like on the wings, on the tail there. And then the rest of the bird is just kind of a brownish, maybe reddish brownish, a little hard to tell. And I see some black on the wingtips. So like again, like what are our options? Thinking like uh it's probably, well, we said it's probably a red tail, but I don't think this one's a red tail in this case.
I agree with you.
Because of all that white.
Sometimes young red tails can show white windows out on the base of the primaries, but they wouldn't be as bold and they don't have that big white window.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you're right. Red tail doesn't work.
I'm thinking that this is a Ferruginous hawk.
Right. So our 3 points
based on that, like the white, the 3 points, right, and then the kind of red, brown, a little bit of black on there.
Yeah. We can also see that the habitat's really good for Ferruginous, being it is a prairie dog town there with a very short grass, and so that's where they like to be. They're often seen down low over the ground like that too, because they like to perch out on the ground, out in the open space. So they'll fly from their perch because they're already down low, so they just stay low sometimes. All right, cool. So we got a Ferruginous hawk, and it is an adult. With our tail pattern there and a little bit of reddish tones. Maybe hard to assess that in this particular view. So one thing though, before we move on, we can celebrate because DFO's Spring Hawk Watch at Dinosaur Ridge records more Ferruginous hawks than any other hawk watch in the US. So we are champs here for Ferruginous hawk. Spring Hawk Watch, if you want to take part in that or be up there when the hawk watch is going on, you can check it out in the springtime.
That's really
all right. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So here you go. So
you get three on, six birds on one side, David.
We have different things going on. So let's start out with number one.
All right. Yeah. Let's look at number one.
And you have to identify both birds. All
right. Let's see. So number one, we've got a really dark bird on the left and a much lighter bird on the right that also has a lot of dark on it. That bird on the left, the thing that jumps out to me is it looks like a big, relatively big bird.
Yeah.
It looks like a flyer with those wings.
It's got fingers
and it's got that tail that kind of fans out but kind of comes up to a point. And I think I see a big bill, so I think that's probably a raven. Don't ask me to ID Chihuahuan versus common, but we'll assume probably a common. And so then the bird on the right, it's roughly a similar size. And the thing that jumps out to me about that one on the right is, again, we see a lot of light, a lot of like pale white color, and that really dark belly. And I think I see on its right wing, I think I see a lot of dark kind of right there at the carpal area. So would love to watch that bird fly for another minute, but
right.
Just looking at this picture, I'm guessing that's a rough-legged hawk. Again, with the tail, we've got the dark spots. I would assume on that left one, there's probably a matching like polka dot,
Right.
as it were.
Okay. Blotch. Awesome. Yeah, so we have roughly hawk with common raven. Excellent. 2 for 2 there on the first one. How about number 2 in the bottom center
Okay,
there?
number 2. Okay, we got 2 birds again. The first thing that jumps out at me is the bird on the left is either much bigger or much closer than the other one. They kind of look like they're probably kind of flying together. So that one on the left looks big. And even just the wings on that bird look huge. And I see some pale on the head there, right? Like that kind of jumps out at me. When I see a big wingspan like that, I start thinking like, it's definitely a raptor. Could it be an eagle? And then I see that kind of pale, I can imagine that it's gold on the nape there. So I'm going to call that one a golden eagle.
How do you know it's like, aside from some of those size things and the gold nape, how can you tell it's not just a dark morph Buteo of some kind?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing that always jumps out to me on the eagles is like how long those like the primary fingers, as it were, are. And then the head looks big.
The heads are big.
And it doesn't match any of our other like really like standard Buteo definitions, right?
Well,
what else do you see in it?
Well, all the dark ones, except for the Swainsons, they all have pale flight feathers, so they're very white on the primaries and secondaries. It makes a very striking bird in that pale and dark contrast. Also, the eagles, of course, have very plank-like wings. They're very broad.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And long, and it almost looks like a board sticking out. So
yeah,
okay, so you're going
a rectangle rather than like some triangle
more pointed. Yeah, so you're going to golden eagle there. So what do you think about the other one?
The one on the right, similar to the bird in photo number 1, I see that pale, and I see the 3 points of dark, the polka dots on the wings, a dark looking belly, and dark outer kind of edging of the feathers there. So I'm gonna call that another rough-legged hawk.
Okay, so we're having a good day with 2 rough legs and an eagle, and
nice.
raven's
Must
always
be
good.
Somewhere good.
Yeah, so how about number 3 here?
Number 3. Oh, okay. It looks like a really cloudy day. It's overcast. Right time to go inside and have some hot tea or cocoa. But I see the bird on the top. It's a really dark bird. We've already had a raven. We've had a golden eagle. I don't think you give me an extra one of those. And then the one thing I notice about that bird is that its wings look like they're up. Right. They're not kind of horizontal to its body. They're kind of holding it up in a V. And then that head is a little hard to see, at least on my computer, but it looks like it's got a bald head. So I think that's a turkey vulture with all of that, and then also the shape of the wings in general.
And the two colors on the wing.
Yeah, a little bit of two colors going on there. So then the other bird, the pale bird. So we know turkey vulture, that's a good clue that we're probably not in the deep winter out here, because they're here in, spring, summer, fall.
Yeah.
That gives us a sort of a seasonality point. Unless it's just a real cold turkey vulture. So that the other bird looks smaller in comparison, a little hard to tell, but it's super pale. And so what are our options for that? It's got kind of fat looking wings. I can't really make out how many primary feathers it has, but the fingers, as it were, look dark. And I see a dark edging on the back of the wing, but again, a little hard to tell if that's just like a artifact from the photo or if that's real. It is super pale. I don't see, so a ferruginous hawk It was pale like that. The adult would have the red on the legs, and I think I would
Right.
see that in this photo, and I don't see that here, right?
Good, good.
So we did say that the juveniles have pale legs, but I don't see any, I really don't see any red. There might be a little bit of splotching on this bird. From all of that, I can't see the tail because it's not fanned out. Like it just looks kind of pale. Doesn't look red. A red-tailed hawk. Again, like it could be a red tail. I don't see the like dark on the patagial band up there on the front of the wing, so I don't think it's
No,
a red
yeah.
tail.
Okay,
Gosh.
where are you
Okay.
then?
So
What
what
do you
are
got?
we? I think we might, are we a broadwing hawk?
I see when I look at the tail, I see that there is a dark subterminal band. I can't
Oh,
actually, there's a dark
okay.
band
Maybe if
there
I
at the
get
end,
real close to
but there's only
my
one.
monitor.
There's only one, but then the body
True.
is sparsely streaked. So those things match with a young Broadwing, which I think is
Yeah.
what that is. And I'll bet you these two birds are migrating together, and you can see their wings are kind of set. They're in a glide going forward,
Hmm.
and I'll bet you they're having a pal time. And like you say, it's not the winter time because neither one of these would be present at that season. So I think you got it right again.
Nice.
Broadwing
Nice.
hawk with
That was
thirsty
a tough
vulture.
one.
Excellent, good. So we're keeping it going here. Now we got a tree
A
obscuring
tree
things.
bird.
Yeah.
All right, so looking at it, we know its shape or its size relative to the tree. That looks kind of like a cottonwood to me. Um,
Good.
we can tell it's a hawk by the overall shape, so we're starting off good there. It's not a turkey vulture. I see a dark head, and I see dark kind of coming down onto the chest, and then some pale rusty stuff on the belly, but I don't really see a defined belly band like a red-tailed hawk would have. Um, there's leaves on the tree, so again, that gives us a clue to seasonality, right?
Oh, good, good.
The leaf, we could have a weird season where there's still some leaves late, but
Not green ones.
yeah, not green ones, hopefully. So based on that, like a red-tailed hawk would have like more of a belly band probably. And we talked about the hood, the hangman's hood, as it were, for a red-tailed hawk doesn't really come down lower. And I see that kind of a bib instead of a hood on this bird. So from all that, I'm going with Swainson's hawk, or
Right.
I already forgot what you decided to rename it, but
Yeah, the Pampas to Prairie hawk.
Purpose to Prairie hawk. That's a mouthful.
The peepee haw. Just say peepee haw. See? All right, so you're doing well.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
All
Uh-oh.
right. Okay.
So
What
you're
is
getting
this little
tired now.
guy?
So yeah, this guy looks a little different.
Hey, look, it looks cute. Is it a kestrel? It's not a kestrel.
Well, maybe. It's kind of
Oh.
got some spots, some dots.
Okay. Yeah, so let's see here. We're in a place where there's a big field. I can see that in the background. I also see some trees. It's like a line of trees in the background. It's got some green in it, so we that gives us another seasonality clue. Um, that head looks so tiny. And it's got a tiny little bill.
Oh yeah.
So those are both things that I'm kind of looking at. Like, it doesn't have, let's rule out red-tailed hawk, right? Like a red-tailed hawk, I think of having like a big blocky head, with a bill that's a little bigger and would normally have, again, like that belly band. And this has more of like kind of some scaling on the front of it,
Yeah,
rather than like, go
the
ahead.
young red tails really have a really bold belly band usually, don't
Yeah,
they? So
a
that's
lot of times, yeah.
pretty different
Yeah.
pattern.
So, what are our other options? So, like, we talked about broad-winged hawk, we talked about ferruginous hawk, and we talked about the rough-legged. Um, a it doesn't strike me as ferruginous hawk because it's really chocolatey, and again, like a ferruginous hawk would usually have just like feels bigger, and it usually has that big gape on it. So I don't think it's a ferruginous hawk. It looks too cute for that. Um, for Ferruginous, oh sorry, for broadwing hawk, I'm not sure. The like kind of scaly patterns on the belly are like we talked a little bit about that. And then
So
for rough-legged hawk, go ahead.
can you tell what time of year it is? Oh, you said
It
that.
does look
So
like spring.
so this is an adult or a young bird?
I think this is a
You say
oh
spring, so but
yeah,
when
summer.
does
It
it
could be
show?
summer. There's some like brown in the grass, but there's a lot of green. So maybe this is fall. That's a good point.
Or
Early
August or
late summer before the
yeah.
leaves start turning.
And can you tell if this is an adult or a young bird, and how might you tell that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
One thing is that it really doesn't look like any of the adult patterns at
Yeah,
all,
that's
does
true. Like I'm kind of
it?
like grasping for like which is it? And yeah, I think it is a young bird. So
The other giveaway is that those pale edges on those feathers on the wing and maybe part of the back we can see very typical.
like
That kind of
getting kind of
scaly pattern is typical of juvenile birds, especially fresh
yeah,
ones.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so a young
Yeah.
bird.
So based on all of that, giving the timing of it, we know it's a young bird. I'm inclined to guess that it's a broad-winged.
Ooh, ding,
Is
ding,
that
ding,
wrong?
ding. No, it's not correct. No, this is a
That's a
young
tricky one.
Swainson's.
I was trying to
So
turn it into oh, it's a
it's a
Swainson's. I
Swainson's,
totally
and
forgot about Swainson's as an
yeah,
option.
I'm not surprised. We've had a lot here, so that must have been it. Yeah, no, the Swainson's, of course,
Yeah.
is this is a fresh juvenile, and that kind of creamy tone underneath is
Yeah.
good. Now, one of the differences with the Broadwing is they really are not, the young ones are not creamy underneath, and they have a different pattern of streaks underneath. It just
Mm,
looks different, and I'll let you go back and look at some of the images, but they're more concentrated on the upper breast and they become very sparse and they're differently shaped. They're not as big and blotchy as the dark marks on this
okay.
bird.
It's good
So
to
those are
know.
some
Yeah.
differences there. So, all right. So, juvenile Swainson's hawk there, and we're gonna we got at least one more here. So
Oh boy.
stick with me here. And this there maybe
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
getting harder. I don't know, but
Yeah.
maybe that last
Okay.
discussion will help.
Yeah. Let's see. So this one looks like a bruiser. It looks like a serious bird to me. I see all dark on the top. Not really any variation. There's a little bit of light on it, kind of on the insides of those primaries. I don't see any redness that like I would expect on a ferruginous. So I'm gonna say like probably not a ferruginous. Um, I
It
see
really
a
doesn't
little.
have much in the way of the 3 points of light either. That
No, it
both
doesn't.
ages of Ferruginous show that boldly. So that sounds like a
Yeah,
good dismissal.
yeah. Um, the wings do look like pretty big. You mentioned, I think you mentioned that the broad-winged hawk has. Were you saying that the broad-winged hawk has four of those like primary fingers rather than five? I don't know if I can even tell that, but this
And
kind of looks
so
like four.
it does, yeah. It's sometimes
Um,
hard to tell because of our angle is not the best for
yeah,
discerning that, but I would have to
yeah,
count four.
yeah. I see a little bit of pale on that rump, but not a ton. Might just be a light artifact.
Well, what are you
What
suggesting?
else? Well, you mentioned that like Swainson's hawks can have white kind of on the rump. I don't think
Right.
that this is a Swainson's hawk. I think this is a broad-winged hawk.
So,
I'm
but
gonna they're gonna be broad-winged hawked until the
but
rest till the end.
don't Broadwing hawks have big, bold black and white tail bands?
They do, but can you see that from the top? I've
Well,
already forgotten.
you could if it was an adult, but that's the thing. This is a juvie, so it doesn't have that tail pattern, but it is a broadwing hawk,
Sweet.
and its pattern is with the narrow bands with one bolder dark subterminal band. Oh, you're right. It doesn't
Yeah.
have the 3 points of light. It's kind of compact size and shape, and that tail pattern is pretty good. And so this is we can even see a little bit of streaky underneath, suggesting a young bird, but we can't really see a whole lot there.
Yeah, it's tough to
Um,
tell.
but cool. So good discerning that as a broad wing. And we have one last image here. The lighting's not so good on this bird.
Oh gosh.
Probably
Yeah.
distant in a scope or something.
Yep. Yep. The thing that jumps out to me on this one is I think I see a belly band. It's probably a red tail.
Yes, we had to get that in the belly band,
Yeah.
hangman's head. Excellent. Well, Lori, you did really well. You get a gold star there, and we're going to conclude with that. And I'd like to thank our photographers whose images were used for this presentation. We couldn't do bird bombs without you. So thank you very much. Hopefully images are credited on each of the slides. And if you'd like to be a Bird Bombs photo contributor, I'd just like to have permission for photos I use. You can let me know. I can get, if you have stuff on eBird, I can access it very easily. So thank you to all the photographers. And I'm already getting ready for the next Bird Bombs, which is going to be called Get Gullible. So I want everybody to be gullible. I want everybody to be gullible. So that means you're going to learn the basics of Gull ID. So it's coming up in December 14th. And you can watch any of the Bird Bombs episodes on our DFO video archive. Go to our programs and events page and scroll down a bit to the Bird Bombs button. And you can view any of the episodes. This one will be up hopefully in a couple days, and you can review it at your leisure and recommend it to friends. So do tune in for Get Gullible in December, and let's consider any, let me stop screen sharing here, and we'll consider any questions or comments we might have.
Yeah, and if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to use the Q&A feature, or the chat works too. I'll catch it if you chat at me. David, I do have a question for you. So you've renamed the Swainson's hawk. You did not rename the Harlan's hawk.
Wow.
What would you rename the Harlan's hawk?
You know, I don't have a quick answer to that one, but it would not be renamed because it is, as far as I understand, as being a subspecies. They're not going to go at that level in working on the renaming. So I think that one's going to squeak by, but it does open a door for or a question. You know, what about all that?
Sure, yeah.
You know,
well, what would you rename it if someone came and said we have to rename this one too?
The Great Northern Hawk. I don't know. I really like them because I like their kind of blackishness with the white markings on the breast.
Yeah.
So maybe like the white bibbed hawk or something like that would be good.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Let's see. You also mentioned about how red tails and Swainson's hawks build nests, and they kind of fight with the great horned owls, but great horned owls use these Buteo nests and rely on those. So there's that kind of love-hate relationship going on there. But what about, we always see all of these Buteos out on the plains, out on the prairie in the winter. Do they compete with each other? Because they're all kind of Buteos. I was curious, like, do they eat different things? Are they kind of like fighting out for territory?
So I'd say that they both overlap and they separate out. So habitat-wise, they have preferences, and you won't see, for example, the rough-legged hawk in areas with a lot of trees or close to major drainages where there's riparian corridors. They're going to be out in wide open spaces. But the red tails like to be in areas that are more treed, more so than the wide open spaces. They're out there too. The Ferruginous has its preference for open areas and prairie dog towns. Swainson's a little different, and they kind of sort it out seasonally too, to some degree, with they don't overlap. And it's kind of interesting because there are a lot of commonalities between the Swainsons and the rough legs, sometimes in how they forage and different things, but they're here at different times of year. So they sorted out by season, and then if prey is abundant or good in an area, then you can see a lot of the Buteos all gathered together in one particular area, on one region of roads or whatever, and that's really exciting. And that happens where you've got great habitat, you've got good prey resources, and there they just kind of go for it, I think, and just compete with each other and work it out. So those are exciting spots to find.
Yeah, I know I've seen it up here at Lagerman Reservoir in the winter. There's a big prairie dog colony and fields kind of out to the west of it, and there's regularly multiple species of hawks and eagles all kind of fighting over some
Yeah, there's
carcass of
some
some kind.
great
And
places in Boulder County to see multiple species in the same area.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Cool. Let's see. Tom asks, when the Swainsons come in the summer, have you noticed anything around, do they kind of dominate over the red tails in terms of territory, or is it again like they're kind of splitting it up and sharing it?
The red tail, I would say I haven't really noticed that particularly. One thing I'll observe is that the red tails already begin nesting before the Swainsons are even here. So red tails are sitting on eggs before the Swainsons have arrived. So there's a major difference right there. So the Swainsons aren't going to compete with a red tail that's got his established nest. They're sorting it out a little bit by some habitat preferences and that there's enough spaces for the Swainsons to occur where the red tail's also common. So I don't really think there's much of that going on. I don't think for the most part.
Cool. Yeah. And we have one more question. Someone asks, do you know anything? Can we visit landfills in December in Colorado? I guess they're thinking that that might be a place to see some raptors, or maybe they're getting ready for your gull presentation
Yeah,
and
let's
just
get
getting
gullible.
excited because that's a great place to see gulls.
Let's get gullible.
Do you know
Well,
anything about the landfills
I mean, the
situation?
landfills they're in open settings and they have a lot of potential prey like rats and all kinds of stuff, I would imagine. So there's probably regularly Buteos and other raptors around those places, but a lot of them have limitations on how you can visit. Most of them you can't at all. So you have to look into the particular
Each
circumstance
one.
at a particular spot. A lot of them are not open to the public, but you might be able to get nearby. But I don't think of them as great like raptor observing spots, or if I want to go see these raptors, I'm going to go there. They're very disturbed places for one thing. There's a lot of
Yeah.
activity, so in that way, they're maybe not the best.
Yeah. Yeah. I know one place where I used to always see lots of raptors in the winter was the Bar Lake Christmas bird count, which I think is usually like around January 2nd, but out there on the plains by the airport and just cold, and that's a great day for getting all your Buteos in really early in the year.
Yeah,
If
and
anyone's
get
looking for a Christmas bird count to do.
I'll also mention that DFO has several field trips coming up in just the next few weeks that have openings that are going to be going to great opportunities to view hawks. One in particular as a leader who wants to really take people to another level in their hawk ID and hawk appreciation. That's going out to the DIA Raptor Loop on December 10th. But we have several others too, so take a look at the DFO field trip calendar.